Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending SCLA's sponsored webinar titled Current Copyright News. I am Megan Palmer, and I will be your moderator today. Our presenter is Tucky Taylor from the University of South Carolina, Columbia. Today's webinar will discuss some of the current copyright action that could affect libraries and the important work we do. It will cover some of the current cases, legislative action, and a treaty. It will give a brief overview of each area with some context and provide great resources for further information. A recording of the session and presenter slides will be emailed to all registered users. The video will be uploaded to SCLA's YouTube channel. All questions asked will be answered at the end of the presentation. Let me know if you have any trouble with hearing or viewing the webinar.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system.
Okay, you want to unmute me?
Yes, you're unmuted.
All right, awesome. Thanks, everybody. Sorry about the little mishap this morning or this afternoon. I just had a Windows update right before I had to log into this, so always exciting. Thanks for coming. I'm excited to see so many people here interested in copyright during our summer. It is definitely a lot going on right now. It seems like every time I turn around, there are about 10 or 15 things. Just a few brief seconds, I guess, about who I am so that you'll know a little bit about why I'm able to talk about this. My name's Tucker Taylor. Some of you may know me as Tucky. I've worked in academic libraries for over 30 years at this point. And for most of that time, I didn't really have to worry a lot about copyright because we lived in an analog world. However, about 10 or 12 years ago now, I started hearing about lawsuits that were going on down to our neighbors in the South with Georgia, and I realized that they're getting sued for doing exactly what I do, which concerned me a little bit, as I do not wish to get sued. And it progressed from there, from me realizing that I could get sued to me realizing that we had important rights that I needed to be able to exercise to be a good librarian. So I started on this journey of educating myself. I keep up with copyright. I have several copyright projects going on. My favorite copyright project at the minute is a journal that I'm co-editor-in-chief of, which is the Journal of Copyright and Education and Librarianship. And I've been editing that journal for about 4 years now. So that's kind of my background. I'm head of circulation at Thomas Cooper Library at the University of South Carolina. And my main interaction with video in my job is with either electronic reserves or with our film and media being used for classrooms. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. And just so you know, just throw questions into the chat at any point, and Megan, I'll rely on you to yell at me if we get a question. We're going to talk a little bit today about changes in the Registrar of Copyright, the Copyright Office. We're going to talk a little bit about legislation that affects libraries and copyright. We're going to talk about one court case, the Georgia State case that I mentioned earlier. We're going to talk about a treaty, the Marrakesh Treaty, and we're going to talk about a few I think more fun things about great work that librarians are doing to help exercise our rights with copyright. So let's get moving. So I'm going to assume that most of you know a little bit about copyright, but you don't have to know a lot to be able to follow along. If for some reason I start spewing out jargon or saying things that don't make sense, please stop me. Copyright is basically the set of laws that governs how we share information, what you're allowed to copy from someone who created something. Right now, copyright has moved from, being able to keep something protected for 14 years with 14 years renewal, and it only covered books, charts, and maps. And now it's moved forward to present day, where you can copyright almost anything that has the teeniest bit of creativity, including selfies or your notes for this webinar. Anything can be copyrighted if it has a tiny spark of creativity and it has a modicum of creativity and just put into some sort of fixed form, including electronic. So it lasts for the life of the author plus 70 years, which is a really, really long time. Fortunately, after a while, things fall back into the public domain so that we can all use them. There are also important exceptions and limitations, including some very important exceptions for librarians that allow us to do things like, under some circumstances, make copies for users, do interlibrary loan, preserve works, and of course, we also have exceptions that are important, like fair use for everybody. So I'm not going to go into any great specifics over that because that's a different webinar, but that's the basics of what we're going to be talking about today, and let's talk a little bit about some specific things that are going on. So the Copyright Office is sort of like the mothership for copyright. They're the federal agency that administers the law, and right now we are very, very fortunate because it falls under the Library of Congress, which is right now headed by Carla Hayden, who you can see on the left. There was a lot of drama with the current administration wanting to move the Copyright Office out from under the Library of Congress and into its own special agency because it's perceived as being extremely important and maybe more closely related to patent and trade than it was to copyright. But I feel that there's not been a lot of talk about that lately. Carla Hayden seems to be navigating the political waters very well and has been able to hold on to this, which is, I think, extremely important because she seems to have users' rights in her forefront. She understands the issues from what I've seen, her interactions with copyright. And we as librarians, of course, would love to keep the Copyright Office under the Library of Congress because it helps us, and we're important to moving us forward as a society. Libraries are, and making sure that we still have rights, especially when we're coming up against groups like the recording industry, the film industry, and the publishing industry also. Oftentimes they want to protect everything, and we want our users to be able to do some things, and we need to be able to help our users. So it's great that it's still with her. Also, very recently, I believe it was end of May, Karen Temple, who was the acting registrar of copyrights for several years, has been appointed the permanent registrar of she was the acting registrar of copyrights, and now she is the permanent, which is good for us. She's eminently competent. She has lots of experience in the Copyright Office, and although she did work for the recording industry, she's generally perceived as being very reasonable and not necessarily biased towards the recording industry or the film industry or other industries that seem to hold a lot of sway under the previous registrar of copyrights, who was definitely not perceived as favorable to libraries. So this is great news for us that she was appointed to be the permanent registrar of copyrights. So we now have a great Librarian of Congress and a great registrar of copyrights that both understand the needs of libraries. So good news there. Now, there's some legislation going on as well, including, I feel like I can't go anywhere. I went on vacation and everything was fine, and I was just going to talk about the Music Modernization Act. I came back from vacation, and the CASE Act had all of a sudden grown legs and started running. And I'm going to be honest in saying that I have not read the full act yet. I've read several blog posts and I've skimmed the act, but I would encourage you to go on to the the EFF's website and check out a lot of what they've got written about this act. It is through both the House and the Senate, although I believe the laws that are drafted from both the House and the Senate need to be harmonized. There's some slight differences between the two, but it creates a very interesting and tangly kind of mess, in my opinion. A little background on the CASE Act. Its main objective is to create a small claims court. You've got a situation now where if you're a small copyright owner, let's say that you're a person who takes scientific pictures of bugs doing bug things, and it takes you a lot of effort and work to create these photos, and then you post one somewhere, or somebody that you sold a photo to post it somewhere, and then it's all over the internet and you have no control over it. You have to go into federal court, which can cost an average of $200,000 to sue somebody in federal court, and you don't have that kind of money as a small creator, and you just want everybody to quit stealing all your stuff. So this is supposed to give small creators the ability to take action without having to go through federal court. It creates a small claims court that would report to the Copyright Office. Small claims to them, which doesn't seem like small claims to me, a librarian who makes library money. It's limited to only $15,000 per infringement and a $30,000 max, which could definitely bankrupt, I think, a lot of people in the U.S. $30,000 really doesn't seem like small claims to me. One of the provisions is that you cannot collect attorney fees recovery through this board. It's actually not a court, it's a board. They also have some sort of strange provisions where law students could help represent you, which I find to be weird. There's no obvious appeal process unless it's some sort of poor judgment on their part that doesn't follow the law, which seems strange. It's termed as being voluntary, that you still have the option to sue somebody in the federal court, but it doesn't really seem to be voluntary if somebody comes for you and wants to drag you into that court. There's paperwork that could be filled out to try to force the person to make them sue you in federal court, but I'm still unclear as to how that would function. So as a person who uses a lot of copyrighted works and posts them online for faculty to use in teaching, I'm concerned about this because it's not voluntary if I'm getting served. It doesn't actually have to be a board. There are going to be some decisions, if they're a minimum of $5,000, that could be decided by one person. And the board would be awarding statutory damages, which don't have to show that you had actual harm. There are just a lot of questions. And there's concern that it could really empower copyright trolls, and that it would be hard for the individual person to fight, and that the process just isn't very clear, especially with these statutory damages, and I really don't think that $30,000 is a small amount. So the CASE Act, I think, is worth libraries checking out, seeing where it is. There's lots of good information on the EFF's website, and I'd encourage you to take a look at it. It's a lesson to me to not go on vacation because apparently things happen. So the next thing, which is a little bit more of good news for us, I would say, although it's complicated but good news, if that makes any sense, is the Music Modernization Act. Now, some of y'all may have heard of this. It dropped last year. It mainly talked about compulsory licensing systems and enabled sound engineers to get recording royalties. But that's not really what it did for libraries. There was a provision in it that talked about 1973 sound recordings. Now, 1973 sound recordings were a special animal. With music copyright, you have a multitude of different copyrights that could be acting on one work. So let's say you've got the song Pretty Woman. That song could have the lyrics copyrighted as a poem. It could have the musical composition, the notes and things written down in a score as a separate copyright, and then the particular rendition of it by Roy Orbison or whoever else could also have copyrights involved in it as the actual sound recording. So prior to this act, 1973 sound recordings were not governed by the federal copyright law. They were covered by state law, which, you know, in the internet world, it's hard enough to have different countries have their own separate laws. Imagine having 50 states having their own separate copyright laws governing pre-1973 sound recordings. It was insanity. And one of the problems with that is that they never really fell into the public domain, or maybe they did in a few states, but it was so complicated that it was hard to understand how it works. So if you're a music archivist and you wanted to preserve these works, you never knew when you were safe to do that. So that was very, very messy and very confusing. So what they did with this is they created a law that governed these for sound recordings, these the copyrights for these sound recordings, and made things kind of complicated, but also we at least now know the rules, and it's for the whole country. It's not 50 different states that you have to memorize. It ensures that the works will rise into the public domain at some point so that they'll be available for everybody to use. And it made clear that certain exceptions apply, like fair use and the right of first sale, certain public performance exceptions, including the one for us to be able to play music in class if that's what we're using. If you're teaching a music class and you need to play music in order to teach that, then you're able to do that. And also, the Music Modernization Act gave us some great library superpowers. In Section 108, there are exceptions just for libraries. Section 108 of the copyright law is a number of things that help libraries do things like interlibrary loan, or be able to preserve books under certain circumstances, be able to replace books if they're lost or stolen under certain circumstances. So lots of good stuff in Section 108 for all about our library superpowers with copyright. In Section 108, it was updated from the Music Modernization Act. It allows librarians and archivists lots of different freedoms to do things that we can only do, Section 108H allows librarians to do things if works are in the last 20 years of their copyright that we can't do with other works that are under copyright. So if you wanted to use them for scholarship or research, or if you wanted to preserve them, if they're within their last 20 years of copyright, we have certain rights prescribed to us under Section 108. Now, the Music Modernization Act extended all those rights to all the pre-1972 sound recordings. So this really helps music archivists, people who teach music, musicologists, to be able to do lots of great things with these works regarding teaching, scholarship, and for archivists, the preservation of these works. So obviously the 1972 sound recordings, many of them are going to remain in copyright for many, many years. So having these abilities extended to all these works is a great benefit. And honestly, it wasn't necessarily expected by the people who were following the law. So a big win for ALA and the people who worked really hard to make sure that libraries' rights were represented. Another great benefit in the Music Modernization Act is that it provides certain users' rights that after you perform a good faith, reasonable search, which isn't quite defined, but get what you can. If it's not something that's being made commercially available, then users beyond libraries have the right to do things that involve scholarship and research and other types of uses, as long as they notify the Copyright Office. Now, it sounds a little complicated and convoluted, but I could see this really helping a lot of people who wanted to use works that were no longer being commercially exploited. It keeps them from being held hostage. So another great win in the Music Modernization Act, not just for libraries, but for all the people. So good on us, we're winning. Music Modernization Act was a win for us, so good job, libraries. So let's talk a little bit about court cases. Court cases were how I got into all this mess, and it tends to be the things that people like to follow because they're kind of newsy and they're also kind of scary. But I wanted to dispel a little bit of some of the, I think, mythology and fear mongering that goes around with court cases. So let's talk a little bit about Georgia State. So this was actually my entry into copyright shenanigans. Back in 2008, the Copyright Clearance Center was going around the country and asking universities and libraries within those universities to buy a site license for electronic reserves posting. So they came to many different universities, not including University of South Carolina, oddly to my knowledge, but many of our neighbors in the north, in North Carolina, got the knock on the door, and they were like, hey, you should buy this site license for a lot of money. When I called to ask about it, it was, I believe, $300,000 back in 2008, and we only pay maybe $10,000, $15,000 a year in copyright compliance charges already. So why would we spend that much money on a site license? It was madness. So I was like, thanks, not interested. But they were basically saying, we're going to find people to sue you if you don't buy the site license to allow these blanket permissions to occur for electronic reserves. So Georgia State said, thanks, no thanks. And after some talking to each other, the talks broke down. They actually wanted a seat on the faculty committee that was making copyright policy decisions, I understand. And they were just like, that's not how you academic, you're going to have to sue us. So, so we just reached an impasse. And that was back in 2008 when the lawsuit actually started. It's mainly a lawsuit about fair use. What are you allowed to post online for teaching? And it only covers book chapters. It doesn't cover things like journal articles or artwork or stuff like that. And it's a very mixed bag. But I think that it mainly came out in favor of libraries. It started off with a ton of cases. And then it was whittled down to 99 and then reduced to under 50. And of those 50, there are merely a handful that the publishers were able to prevail on. And they were able to prevail on ones where there was a license available for the work, and the amount that was used was more than what was felt to be appropriate. So in the vast majority of the cases, libraries won. At certain points of the case, again, it has been bouncing around. It started at the district court. It went up to the appellate court in 2014. It went back down to the district court in 2016 with different instructions, and it went back to the appellate court and came out with a ruling just last year. And everybody who follows this case is kind of fatigued because we're like, we're done with this already. It's been over 10 years that this has been going on. When are we going to get some clarity? And I think that the truth is just, we're not necessarily going to get clarity from every case. You know, this case only applies in the district that Georgia State's in, which is not South Carolina's district for federal court. So it doesn't necessarily apply to us, although it is certainly going to have sway if we ever did get sued. But I think that what it showed is that it's very, very expensive to sue public education, and you don't necessarily get what you want. So at different points in the case, attorney fees were awarded to Georgia State University, which that really is the win. And I think that it's not necessarily been encouraging to other people that you should come for libraries, because people want to support what we're doing, and we are not out there pirating works and doing a bunch of shady, I mean, who is more rule follower than a library? I mean, have they met catalogers? We like rules here. So, we're not the copyright pirates, and we're here to help people exercise their rights, but only in ways that are permissible. So that's the Georgia State case. It's still going on technically, but I would be surprised if at some point it either just died or there was a settlement out of court. But I think that it did create it created a message that, libraries, you may want to come play with us, but we are not easy targets. So treaties. Let's talk a little bit about treaties. One of the ways that copyright law comes into play is not just the United States gets together and decides what the laws are going to be for our country, but countries in general get together and decide that we need to be able to cooperate and get along and have international agreements so that we can all live together in the internet age. This has been going on actually since the 1800s with the Berne Convention Treaty, and it continues today. There's a World Intellectual Property Office called WIPO, and they're the main governing body that helps shepherd nations through creating copyright treaties so that we can all share and use works of each other's and create some sort of level of harmony among us. So a treaty that I'm extremely excited about is the WIPO-Marrakesh Treaty. This treaty allows people who are disabled to have access to certain accessible copies, format copies of works. It requires the countries to enact exceptions that allow people to make these copies, distribute these copies, including libraries. So it was mainly based on the Chafee Amendment to the copyright law in the United States, which came in during, I think, the heyday of ADA excitement and legislation. The copyright law was amended to allow making copies for people with print disabilities under certain circumstances. So the fact that it was modeled on a U.S. law, I was very proud of. I feel that helping our users who have print disabilities is extremely important, and enabling libraries to do so is also very important. Last summer, the treaty was signed in 2013, but the implementation of that treaty, of course, takes time, and it was just the provisions of the law that updated our law just took effect last summer. It was signed into law by Donald Trump last July. So that was great news. I actually got behind our president to sign this treaty to support our rights. So for those of you who don't feel that Donald Trump has done anything for libraries, here's the one thing. So lots of great stuff going on for libraries with treaties, with court cases, with legislation. And so let's talk a little bit about a few other things that are going on with libraries around copyright. One of the important things that libraries are doing together to help exercise our rights is to partner with each other and create awesome projects that allow our users to benefit and allow us to take full advantage of the rights that we've been given. I think one of the biggest and best well-known of these projects is HathiTrust. It looks like Happy Trust, but trust me, it's HathiTrust. Trust librarians to find some sort of nerdy, ancient Indian elephant god to be able to name it after so that nobody can pronounce it. But it's a great project. It's a giant digital repository. It's a partnership among many R1 libraries, Research One libraries. Lots of works in the public domain are freely available for other people to use. The works that are not within the public domain are available to the partner members under certain circumstances. The University of South Carolina is currently looking at joining HathiTrust, and I'm so excited because one of the things it's going to do for us is give me access to accessible copies of books that they've digitized. You can also use their database for computational linguistics if you wanted to, for example, see when the United States quit using the term these United States and went to the United States. You could go through and analyze all the textual works in their database to see when people started to change the way they used our language. So computational linguistics is made possible by databases like HathiTrust. Another thing that HathiTrust did was it defended our fair use rights and our rights to help provide services to patrons with disabilities when they got sued. They were originally part of the Google Books lawsuit because they were partnered closely with Google Books. And they did break out and became two separate projects and also 2 separate lawsuits, but that lawsuit was decided very favorably. So they exercised our rights, they defended our rights, and they do great things for our users. So HathiTrust, great project, check it out. But not every project is giant. Some projects are very niche and specific. One of the things that I work with at my job is the video collection. And a lot of VHS tapes are dying, and people think that VHS doesn't matter anymore, but there are tons of important educational documentaries that were done that didn't make the jump between VHS and digital format. So it's very complicated to transfer things from one format to another. It involves making a copy, and you potentially implicate copyright law when you do that. Fortunately, Section 108, library superpowers, allow us to do that under certain circumstances, but it's complicated and it's confusing to a lot of librarians. So Sarah McCleskey, who is the librarian pictured in the top right, she is one of the librarians that this was actually her vision, I think. She got people together, banded together experts and said, this is a problem. We need to make it easy for librarians to do this or they're not going to be able to. You know, the law is hard to figure out and people are scared to exercise their rights individually. So she got copyright experts, she got film distributors, got people involved, and now there's a repository and storing house for VHS digital copies. And if you're a partner library and you're following the Section 108 laws, which they help you understand, then you're able to make replacement copies or archive these works so that if your copy deteriorates to the point where it can't be used, which VHS is literally degrading and dying, then you can make sure that these works are preserved and that you're doing it legally and you're not out there acting on your own, having to figure out the law and all those things. So a great example of somebody finding a way to help libraries exercise their rights, even down to a much smaller level than a project like HathiTrust. So we can all make a difference. Public Domain Day, I'm super excited about this. Libraries are very important with making sure that works remain available to people. Works that are from 1923 began to fall into the public domain this year. Nothing had gone into the public domain in the United States for about 20 years. It was very frustrating. A great project, the MIT library digitized 100 works and made them available on Public Domain Day, January 1st this year. And lots of libraries throughout the world were celebrating the United States, allowing works to go back into the public domain for everybody. So lots of great works. There's opportunity for libraries to promote what we do and how we can help our users with activities like this. So you should go check out the MIT Library 100 works that they digitized, and many other libraries digitize smaller amounts and put them up online. Another project that I'm extremely excited about is that EA got $1 million to create a repository for accessible materials. I think you remember me talking about the Marrakesh Treaty. So leveraging the changes in the law from the Marrakesh Treaty as well as the rights that we already have, the University of Virginia and their partners are looking at creating a repository of materials for people who need to use accessible versions of these materials. And they just released a white paper, I believe, this or last week, detailing the project and the rights that you have. Excuse me, they didn't detail the project. They detailed the rights that you have for making materials accessible. And there's also news about the project and the repository on their website. They got the money fairly recently, I believe it was January, so the project's not up yet, but it's extremely exciting. Again, a collaboration among a lot of universities and other interested parties, including the Internet Archive, to make sure that we make materials available for people with print disabilities, that we are exercising our rights, and that we're doing it responsibly. So another great example of how libraries are showing leadership. If you're interested in learning more about copyright, librarians and libraries are also creating lots of opportunities for people to become better educated. Right now in North Carolina, the NC State Triangle Libraries are hosting the Library Copyright Institute. That's going on right now at this very minute. There's a great conference coming up about library copyright in September. I believe it's under $200. It's in Miami, in Oxford, Ohio. So put on by Carla Myers, another opportunity for people to learn more, and it shows how an individual librarian, Carla Myers in this case, can make a big difference by helping people become more educated about copyright. It's always well attended, and she has great speakers, lots of good stuff going on at that conference always. I'd encourage anybody to attend if they can. Who doesn't want to see Ohio in the fall? And that's pretty much it. I just wanted everybody to feel encouraged and included, as well as know what's going on with the law. And I guess since I can't see, I'm curious if we had any questions, Megan. If she is still here with me. Let me see if I can get back to where we were. We might be able to see. All right.
Can you see the chat box now?
So if I have not lost people, my apologies for talking so fast. I was just wondering if there are any questions, concerns, thoughts. You're welcome. So I might have lost Megan also, but you're welcome to throw, I can see the chat again. If people had questions, you're welcome to throw them into the chat box. Oh, hey, Megan. It looks like we did not have any questions. I must have been very clear. All right, guys. Well, if anybody has any questions, feel welcome to reach out to me at any point, and I really appreciate you coming. Thank you. Okay, Megan.
Thank you everyone for attending today. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, August 22nd at 2 p.m. It is titled Library Grants 101 and will be presented by Wendy Copeland from the South Carolina State Library. Please use the links listed below to submit a webinar proposal and to give us feedback about our webinar series. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.